Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. You can also sign up there, and you'll start getting emails from us if you like that sort of thing. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about second hours. We have a second hour about second hours and brainstorm a little bit. We're going to start turning turning the knob up a little bit, and so we want to find out what you'd like us to actually pay attention to. Tomorrow, of course, is the long day. We have education at 8 o'clock. We don't broadcast that, so you have to be on Zoom. So you do have to sign up for that little thing that sends you little emails. And then at noon, of course, we're going back to Belfast, the Belfast method. We will be taking over the Accidental Theater once again. And so you'll get to see, if you go through that email and click on the little button or click on the little link, you'll end up being able to see behind the scenes of how it actually gets done. All right, let's jump into the questions. Courtney, what do we have first?
All right, thank you, Alex. First up, we have Daniel McFarland from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and he wants to say, is there a benefit to the Blackmagic Design Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K G2 over the Blackmagic Design Ursa Mini Pro 12K when both have the same manufacturer's suggested retail price of $6,000 or $5,995? And now
Good, Jonas.
That's only one use case where I would not buy the Pro 12K if you need it for live, because as far as I know, the 12K can't be remotely shaded and doesn't have the SDI return signal.
It does.
It does?
Should be able to do. Yeah, we've definitely shaded it. So
well,
yeah, there's no good reason. I don't know why they're even selling the 4.6. I think the only reason that they're selling the 4.6 is some people want to buy cameras that shade like the other cameras. Like that will, I mean, I think that's the issue, is that people want to, because the 12K is almost identical to the G2, except that it's 12K. And it's not just that it's 12K. The 12K I barely used at all, but the 8K 120 is really interesting. So you have an much more powerful processor inside of the 12K. But yeah, we've definitely used the 12Ks in production. Mixed with the G2s, and they've been working fine. So anyway, so I think that I other than someone really wanting to make sure they're using the same chip and exactly the same color science as their old machines, I think that's the only reason that the G2 is still there. It doesn't make any sense at all, because the 12K is twice the camera for the same price. Next question.
This one comes in from George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It says, Wired, I think it's Wired magazine maybe, unravels the disconnect between inflexible bosses and workers who don't want to go back to pre-COVID. They live in completely different worlds. Your thoughts? And he has a link to the story.
I think it's hard because we can't read the story in real time. so I think it's hard for us to respond to that. I think in general for questions, it's probably better to ask us a pointed question, and you can have reference to it. But the chances of us being able to read something in a question as it comes by is probably pretty low. I do agree, though. I agree in the title that folks that are managers have a set of a lot of the open office was really built around keeping people from doing other things, saving a lot of money on space, all things that were done for the company, and people hated it. I mean, I don't know a single person that enjoyed the open office ever. Now I had a semi-open office with PixelCore, but it's because we had a warehouse and we're all just kind of working everywhere, and I just sat down at whatever desk I was in. But for the most part, like when you go in, when it's really like cattle, like in some of these big companies, it was a little piece of hell. And people then got in a little metal box and they drove for 2 hours to sit in that. And yeah, they don't want to go back, and don't blame them. Go ahead, Roscoe.
One just quick quote is, managers are twice as likely as employees to want to go back into the office. And I think, well, managers want somebody to manage to justify their existence sometimes.
Yeah. Well, to justify their existence, and it's also just easier for them to see what's going on. It's easy, for a manager who has built up they became manager with a certain set of skills that are not necessarily there anymore. And I will say that, and I'll keep saying this, when you don't pay attention to your video and your audio quality, you lose authority. Like, this is a big problem that managers and C-suites and everything else are having, is they can't figure out why people aren't taking them seriously. because they look horrible and they sound horrible. It makes them look small. Like and I think that drives them crazy. Like they really want to go back to a place where they're important, and they can be. All they need is a good camera, good lights, good internet connection, good audio, and they can have a lot more authority back to get that authority back that they lost. But when they come in on their built-in camera with a virtual background and the mic that comes with the computer, not going to get there. It's literally, it's just really, really devastates their ability to lead. And that's part of their problem. And some companies saw this. I can't say which ones, but some of the companies at the beginning of COVID were buying $5,000 kits for their managers. Like literally and they weren't even that good. The kits I saw, I didn't make them. And they was like, it's okay. But it's it's something that they need to figure out. Next question.
I'll read it, but the answer button has disappeared. TJ Asher from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Oh, it's because you have to done. You don't see an answer button?
No, it disappeared. Now things are moving around. Now I see an answer button.
Oh, okay.
All the buttons disappeared on that question.
Okay.
All right. Sorry. Behind the scenes. I'll look behind the curtains. TJ Asher from Minneapolis, Minnesota says, rigging up my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K on site yesterday revealed to me the need for a better tripod head. Please recommend a good, decent video head that is very portable or lighter weight, but solid. I realize solid and lightweight fight each other.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, we got the Manfrotto 502s, the head and the legs, and the legs are the ones where, the two scope and then the two fit inside, and the tri-scope kind of legs. And it's not super lightweight, but it's sturdy for that camera. I think you need something a little bit lightweight. You're not going to get too lightweight with that camera. It's just enough of a weight on the top and depends on the lens. All that goes away if you put the 70 to 200 on it, because then you really do need something.
Yeah, I mean, for cost effective, we actually have a lot of the little Benro, not little, but relatively sizable Benro tripods, which I feel like are a really good cost performance. Then as we move up from those, it starts to get into like Sackler 18s, and then after that, for us, it's like 2575s and O'Connor, either 1030s or 2060s. So those are much different price points. But that where we start is usually in the Benro group, and then move to the Sackler / O'Connor from there most of the time. One thing to look at for the folks that really want to go over the top is that you can take a Ronin and actually tie it back to. They have wheels that you can control it with. That's not the cost-effective way to do it, but someday I'm going to have one of those because it looks so cool. It's a virtual wheel system. Next question.
This one comes in from Lucas Herzog in Mainz. Following up on the Parsec second hour, can one use Parsec to connect to a headless machine, a Mac Mini without a monitor, for example, and mouse for that?
Go ahead, Jonas.
You absolutely can, and this is how. If people were around tonight, we had some music playing, and this is just a Mac Mini that sits right to myself in a little cabinet without anything, has an Ethernet Parsec installed on it, and I can completely control it like it would be there, and I can go full screen, whatever it is. So it works.
It's almost
like a charm.
I guess it's almost designed to work that way. like Parsec is really built for that kind of headless control. Next question.
Comes in from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, for a master controller keyboard 61 note or higher, would a table like this, and he has a link in there, be best ergonomically, or would an XZ stand be better?
I'll go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I took a look at the link. It's Koenig and Meyer, and they make great stuff. They're famous for their instrumental stands. They're very high quality, German made, very well done. It just depends if you want to put rack modules in later, 19-inch rack modules later, or if you want to go and use the vertical space above the keyboard for other things. So take a look at your setup. I didn't come up with this. Mitchell came up with it. He said, go take a look at studio furniture at Sweetwater. And you can find just all kinds of options. Gator makes some nice stuff, and other companies.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Personally, what I would do for something like this, and if I see what you're talking about with master controller, I would have a desk with a double keyboard rollout. So main keyboard would roll out on one, but then your 61 or higher keyboard would roll out right underneath it, and then you can use it. You can get it out of the way and bring it back in. But if once again, it really depends on your setup. These stands, they'll work perfect.
Next question.
This one comes in from James Foslian in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It says, can you tell us more about the certification tests? I think he's talking about Pareto's tests there.
The intention wasn't to have these be certification exams. There's assessment. We crafted these as a community inside of After Hours. And so Jeff Francis, for example, wrote the audio one, and I've got Idelson and Roscoe now helping on some of the other ones. And so they were designed to be an assessment of one's skills. That's what they were designed for. And I'm super sensitive of your vision and your strategy, Alex.
Sorry, say it again.
Super sensitive of your strategy and your vision.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I think it's great. I think it's great to have something that's there to have people just take a look at it. So it gives you a good sense of where you're at. Absolutely. I think they're great. Next question.
Coming in from Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington, says, what has changed in the new version of PlayoutB that was just released? Something for Jonas. Huh?
If we only had someone that could answer that. Yeah, go ahead, Jonas.
One of the new changes is a complete overhaul of the UI to look a little bit cleaner. You can now select clips that should not be played. So for example, D3 will not be played if you go to the next clip. It will automatically jump to another one if there isn't loop, which enables you to basically create a looping playlist. But these can still be manually played. So if this plays, it would jump to video 2 then. That's one of the new features. I have to read my own docs. It always happens. 1 second. You can now select clips also over the API. You have a go-to API command, so you can go to a specific time frame or from your current time frame plus or minus amount of time. There's a bunch of new API settings that have been wished for by Johnny Estes, who's doing a companion module. The whole output module has been redone. So now if it switches between videos, it's more seamless. So there isn't a black frame in between anymore. Just a lot of fixes, performance improvements. And one of the features that I really like is a slide view. So you can now get an overlay view that shows you time remaining and the time, but also a slide view, which hides this information as soon as you cut to it. And it works perfectly if you set your ATEM to autoplay with 2 frames delay.
That's very cool. That's great. Really well done. Yeah. So, and how much is that?
There's a sale right now on Black Friday for 20% off. And then it's $40 plus tax for the single version. And then we released a new version called Flex, which gives you 3 licenses that are all valid on all 3 platforms, macOS, Windows, and Raspberry Pi.
That's great. And where can people find it?
PlayoutB.com. And I'll put the link into Mukana for the discount code.
Awesome. Excellent. Next question.
All right, coming in from Nick Batt in the UK, says, what is the simplest way to control an ATEM Mini remotely over the internet? What elements are required, considering a setup we would send to a remote location where there may be someone less technical?
Go ahead, Jonas.
100% simplest is just having a PC there and then remoting into it with like TeamViewer or Parsec or something. That might not be the best experience. What you also can do is put Companion on a Companion Pi, for example, and then use Cloudflare tunnels to tunnel it out. That way, nobody has to set up any networking or anything. Or you can send a VPN server with it, so you can VPN into their setup or do a site-to-site VPN, so you get access over the ATEM.
Go ahead, Mark.
The firewall we use comes with its own client, and so we just send that client out and let people come right into the network, and you can control where they can go and such. And then
Go
you
ahead,
can
Paul.
just play the software over it.
Paul?
I would say pretty much agree with Jonas, what he said, but I would use remote PC. You can get 10 computers for $80 a year. It's not a bad deal, and it's pretty reliable. TeamViewer I've had issues with TeamViewer. They shut you off, and that'd be my recommendation.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Chrome Remote Desktop works fine for me, and it's free.
In my opinion, the easiest but most expensive solution is we send out Z3s. So we send out Meraki Z3s that are connected to a Meraki network, and then the Z3s hand the IP directly to the. They use the MAC address inside of the ATEM to hand it to know what the address is going to be. So it predefines everything, and everything that goes out that's connected that way allows us to remote control it. And then you can have your software or even your own switching interface on your side controlling that one on the far side. So it's the easiest solution in my opinion. There's a little bit of setup, but from the point of view, you're going to send it out and it's just going to work. That's been our highest level of success. And then you can also do all the screen sharing, or for us, we send out, I admit we send out Mac Minis at the same time. So we use App Remote Desktop as well, because we have all those IPs and they're all inside of our network. But basically that's extending your network out as a router into any house that you happen to drop it into. Next question.
All right, this one comes in from Tulalak Miguel Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York. He says, can you speak about why and when to use which sample rate in audio?
Mitchell?
Well, nowadays, most of the systems auto-sample pretty well between 44.1 and 48, which is where most things sort of live. Personally, when I'm recording, I like to oversample 44.1 to 88.2 because it's a mathematically better division than going from 44.1 to 96 or some other version of that. So personal feeling on the recording, 88.2. As far as programming and working with your DAW or your editing system, really doesn't matter anymore. They're just, they're all good at doing sample rate conversions.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, everything Mitchell said, and add 24-bit. If you can go 24-bit, that would be awesome. 24-bit.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, it depends on what you're doing. It depends. If you're recording audio voice for narration or whatever, 48 is the best choice, I think, because that's the most common and the standard for broadcast for most video. If you're doing sound effects where you're going to be manipulating them, slowing them up, speeding them up, slowing them down, etc., I'd go 90, 96. Only if you want to slow it down later. Otherwise, I'd say stick with 48 because it's the most common and the most universal.
Yep, go ahead, Roscoe.
Frame rates are divisible by frame rates. This probably isn't the issue because of modern clocks are so fast these days in computers, but 48 kilohertz is much more divisible by 30, by 24, by very common frame rates. When you get into 2997, things go out the window because that's a really strange to be divided by, but it really does help keep track of where the samples are, how many samples there are per frame. And when you get into nonlinear editing, you can actually do half frame sound edits, even though you're doing full frame video edits.
I mean, primarily 44.1 is a delivery format. 48 was set as 48 because it's exactly 2 times 24. Like that's why 48 is 48 is because it's a multiplier of 24 frames a second. And this is an Avid thing, and it's actually 47 something or other. That anyway. So lots of things are very good at converting things. You can drop MP4s into your edit timeline. You can do a lot of other things. I really find that when you get into heavy productions, you don't want to trust anything to convert anything for you. So I tend to, I still am very old fashioned and I conform everything. So if I get audio in something other than 48, I make it 48, unless, as Courtney said, unless I'm going to stretch it. If I'm recording something that I just don't know what I'm going to do with it, oftentimes I'm at 96 with 32-bit float or higher. So to do that, so that I have just all the data that's possible that I could get out of that. So recording is a whole different thing. But as far as operating and how you work, I consider 48 a professional standard. This is the sample that everybody's using. 44.1 is something that you deliver to, in my opinion. And if I get something in 44.1, I convert it to 44.8 before I drop it into a timeline, because I don't want to and here's the thing is nothing happens until you render and it crashes, or until you render and something sounds a little slower, until you render and something, anytime you're asking your DAW or your your editing to do something, there is a chance that it will do it wrong. And if you give it, if you're doing production, it's just much, much easier. And there's so many times, almost every single time we've had issues in pipelines, it's because someone put something in there that they said would work and it doesn't. And so it's like literally it's almost 100% hit rate on anomalies within an editing system is something that we put in that it was supposed to do and it doesn't do it right. Next question.
Yeah, it used to be 47,952, but
that's it.
Yeah, don't do that anymore. Do 48K even, because
they just added it. I think they just added it to the last DaVinci Resolve update. They added that little hiccup there. It is. So I will tell you that when you work with really high end sound, sound mixers, the fact that it's not 47, drives them crazy. Because the clocking is something at their level that actually is an issue inside of their clocks. And so, especially if they're mixing in Pro Tools and everything else, but no one does it. Yeah. Next question.
All right. Coming in from another one from Miguel Lopez Waterman in Astoria, says Tony's on Conversations with Tony Mobley utilized your teleprompter for the first time. Looked great, I guess. Can you give us some pros and cons from your perspective?
Go ahead, Tony.
So, hello, everyone.
Hey
this is a interesting conversation for me. So I've been all the past episodes have been either with just a regular webcam or using my iPhone, and I've been very happy with what I've been able to do with the iPhone. And so now I have a teleprompter. And it is absolutely a great experience. And I want to show you what I am looking at right now. And so this is what I see. So you probably can't make that out, but there is two Alex Lindsays showing on the teleprompter right now because I'm cutting the show. And so normally I would be looking at the speaker and the gallery view at the same time with the teleprompter. And with Conversations with Tony Mobley, what we'll be showing will be the guests on my show and myself on Video Ninja. And I will have my notes side by side, or I will pull in any of the questions that are being asked by myself or the attendees of Conversations with Tony Mobley. And so it has been a fantastic experience using the teleprompter for the first time in my conversations. I do want to mention that this past conversation was an exceptional conversation about someone who was dealing with sobriety and how they were vulnerable enough to share their story. And so if you have not had an opportunity to watch it, I would encourage you to watch it. The downside for me right now, there is no downside as far as Conversation with Tony Mobley. There is a downside for cutting the show. And so one of the things that I experienced while cutting the show was that I was trying to have the panel view, not the panel view, but the gallery view and the speaker view open at the same time on the teleprompter. I have not been successful in doing that, in that the YouTube channel has cut to the gallery view, even though I said that I wanted the attendees to be shown. So I'm not sure if I'm sure that's probably a failing on my part, and not the just a matter of me getting more familiar with the teleprompter and Zoom, working them together. But this has been a fantastic experience, and I'm thankful to the community for the support of Conversation with Tony Mobley and the teleprompter.
That's great. Thanks, Tony. Next question.
Coming in from George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia, says, on a 2-monitor Mac setup, how do you change the brightness on the secondary monitor?
Go ahead, John.
There's 2 ways. There's probably more, but 2 easy ways. If you have a Mac keyboard, F1 and F2 are the brightness for each monitor. You just have to be active on each one of those monitors. Then if you go into displays under System Preferences and click on Display Settings, you see it's got the 2 monitors listed here, and then the brightness for each one of the monitors is there. You just select your monitor and hit the brightness.
Next question.
Coming in from Joseph in San Diego, he says, what are the best solutions to reduce echo in a small room? I'm recording audio, and echo is an issue. I still try to control better.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, the trick in eliminating echo is to put sound-absorbing material on any parallel walls, or at least one of the 2 parallel walls that are facing each other. So get you some heavy, like a furniture moving pad or something, and hang it up on that wall to reduce reflections off of any parallel walls. Because the tendency is to, when you get into a small booth, to sound boxy, because you have a very short delay time and the sound comes back onto itself. So you need to deaden some of the parallel walls, and that will eliminate a lot of the echo.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree. Treat the room first, and then you go for what how your microphone goes into the computer, and then last but not least is using computer software to make any adjustments from there. If anything, just hang shirts on the walls. Take chairs and put them in the corner, kind of matching out. That way you don't get any bass traps or anything like that, and you still have enough space for the sound to bounce around and get underneath the furniture, underneath the clothing. So that's basically where it stops. Think of it like a ping pong ball. Once it gets underneath the couch, it just completely dies out and never comes back out.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
In a word, diffusion will also accomplish that. If you have irregular surfaces in the room, they make panels that are like pyramid shapes and all kinds of algorithms that cut the wood or the material to look like a different size room. The diffusion will break down those standing waves and create less echo.
Yeah, the moving blankets are the most common. It's what I actually have all through my office at the moment. And so, those moving blankets, if you go into a sound stage, it's kind of amazing. They'll have like 5 moving blankets bolted into the sound stage. The whole sound stage, like the whole wall, the walls on the entire thing is all these really, really thick moving blankets. You want to get heavy ones and I prefer ones that don't have color, because otherwise that's going to affect you. And so I have black and white ones. I get black and white ones, and I think they're 70 pound, which is kind of like the thickness of them. If they are pulled taut, they have a certain level of absorption. If you let them have fullness, which means that they're like and they have curves to them, they'll actually absorb an enormous amount of sound. Like it's not, now if you absorb too much of the mid-range, which is what they'll do, you then get into the need for bass traps and all kinds of other things. So that's the thing you have to kind of think about. But for when we walk into a location and we want to do a quick knockdown of the reflections, and all we have is C-stands and moving blankets, we throw those up, we get them all wrinkly, and it makes a massive difference, in a echoey room. Next question.
All right, coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, what would you recommend for a cost-effective 15-18U rack brand? Should I specify a sound-isolated rack if the rack will be in the same room as the rest of the equipment?
Go ahead, John.
Cost-effective rack is an oxymoron. Don't buy a cheap one, because you'll do a disservice, especially for audio. Middle Atlantic is my favorite racks now. You could spend hours on there configuring and customizing the racks, but I would look on the used market. I would go on Craigslist or Marketplace on Facebook and look for a good, decent one.
Go ahead, Courtney.
And if you're looking for sound isolation, that can get complex because to stop the sound of fans and things, you have to double baffle everything. It gets quite expensive, and you then end up with a heat dissipation problem. So it's best just to move the panel to another room if you don't have to have physical access to it, within arm's reach, to get rid of the sound. But and cost effective is not going to be a sound tight cabinet.
Yeah, we've definitely put stuff into a variety. I'm trying to figure out I can't remember the name of the company that we've used, but we've definitely put them into a lot of quiet boxes, and they work fairly well. I think they're X-Racks, I think is what we've used in the past. The real issue is they're super expensive. You're talking $3,000, $4,000 for a 20U rack. I mean, that's what you can expect, and that's assuming that you can close it. And so there's a whole bunch of, again, air circulation becomes an issue. All kinds of other things become an issue. And so we definitely used them because we need to put elementals specifically that sound like jet engines. And then what we had to do is put AC units or really high quality fans that they have a vent in the front and a vent in the back. And we had to kind of superpower them to pull enough air, cool air through them to keep the elementals from overheating. So those are things to, kind of think through. I would just say, do everything you can to find another place for that server. With that many racks, just find something else, or you'll end up building a big box around it. That's another way to kind of you can knock down 30, 40 decibels on your own. But I just do everything I can to move my equipment out of my office. Next question.
Okay, coming in from Keenan Campbell. He says, favorite Black Friday deal today.
Go ahead, John.
I got two. PlayoutB, which I just bought the Flex, so available on all three machines. And I just got an email from Resolume Arena, 50% off. So normally it's $800, selling for $400.
Oh, that's great. Good, Jeffrey.
Looking on the hardware front is going to be thin. We do have there's Stream Deck is the 15-button Stream Deck is on sale. And then there was a DJI Mavic that was I think it was like 40% off the Mavic Mini that I saw on Amazon. Software is going to be the bigger one for a lot of deals, and Restream has got their 50% deal going on right now. So if you need a reaggregator to your social networks, so you give that a try.
There you go, Roscoe.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I did buy the 15 button, and that was going to be my suggestion.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Hardware-wise, in Europe, a lot of the Blackmagic stuff is on sale. Basically, all the cameras are down by 17%. The KyloView E1 is a great SRT encoder if you need a budget one. And then Universe Control just is doing a 30% sale today, which is really worth it. I just picked up a couple of licenses with that.
That's great. What's the normal cost for Universe?
150 if you only need to control 3 devices, 750 if you need more, and then there's like more expensive stuff if you need custom HTML and like CAN bus stuff that you use in home automation. For show control, the 750 is totally fine. That's the one I use.
Next question.
Question comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, has anyone ever used the Waves Playlist Writer plugin? I'm thinking it could be useful for a broadcast or stream mix.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, this is a relatively new plugin, and it's based on their Vocal Writer and the Bass Writer plugins. But now they've come out with this playlist writer. It is very good, and it will work for you for a live stream mix, but you have to have the live software. And I tried to go to the Waves website, but apparently they're being hit with everybody trying to buy things, and it's down. But eMotion, I think, is the name of the live mixer. And there's another piece of software that you would need to do and use it live. So check out the specifications as to what you would need to use it live. It'd be great in post, but I think you want to use it for a live broadcast.
Go ahead, Jonas.
Kind of mine used it in vMix to go between different callers and different media, like news articles and stuff that has been sent on short notice to him, and it worked great in vMix Live.
Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. It says, my Canon selfie printer just retired itself. What are the panel's current thoughts on a portable photo printer?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's a really niche market, and really the selfie is it. There isn't a lot of other options out there. There are a few different models, and you get them in black or white, but I'd stick with the selfie.
I think that the main question is how portable does it need to actually be? So is it something that you really want to put into your backpack and be able to print it out or be able to do something relatively quickly? So I've done a lot of this portable printing in different continents. A lot of what I did was working with, if I arrive at a village that I'm working in, a lot of times it's gotten much better now, but for a decade, there was none of them had no one had any photos of themselves, or quality photos of themselves. And so I would take a bunch of photos and then we'd print them all out and hand them out and stuff like that. And we worked with a ton of portable printers. And then what we ended up doing is getting really good printers or even off the shelf, regular office printers, like the little ones that are flat. And Canon makes a lot of good ones of those. And then just hook up to a battery, like literally a UPS. You can just take the UPS, it'll beep, and you just plug it in, and you can run that printer forever on that thing. And so, but you can also get inverters for your car. There's so many battery options now that I just felt like we gave up a lot of quality on the portable printers just because they had a handle. They had a handle and they did it. And I found that if we just built a pipeline around a smaller printer or even a nicer printer, I mean, if I did this again, I don't know when it'll happen in the before times. If I did this again, I would probably take a really high quality Epson 2200 or something like that and put it in the back of the car. And then I'd have a battery and an inverter, and I would just print what I wanted on archive paper. Like I wouldn't bother with the little one because it was just, the quality wasn't as high, and you can get something for the same cost or much less that will do much better job if you just figure out the power supply. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, and I think the selfie is also thermal because it's probably using the exact same thermal paper. Last year I did a review of the HP Sprocket line of thermal printers, and they would match about the same thing. Once again, you can use the exact same paper if it's also a thermal printer.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, I'm watching the Office Hours 2.0 test stream. The panelists looked washed out compared to the Zoom stream. Why is that? He's using a Safari 15.1 on a 2017 MacBook Pro.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, there were some issues with getting washed out. JJ's going solo today, and we didn't even expect the Zoom rooms to come up. But once he got it up, there were a couple issues, but we've been working it out in the back end.
It's actually the reason you're seeing it in that computer specifically is because it doesn't support HDR. So that you got to remember that the test that I'm pushing out is designed as HDR10, so it's going to look washed out if you look at it on anything other than an HDR signal, because that's what HDR looks like when it's not being converted. Go ahead, Jonas.
Exactly that, and what I found out, because I use my Blackmagic video monitor for HDR viewing from my PC, and what I found out that you totally forget is as soon as you plug that in and enable it, it's enabled for all your monitors on Windows, even though 3 of my 4 monitors don't support HDR, and if you enable HDR, it still can look weird.
Yeah. Well, an SDR signal looking at HDR will be really crazy, but I can tell you that it looks really good on my phone. So I'm reviewing this on a on an iPhone 13 or whatever, and it looks good. So it's really just how your older computers, anything older than 2020 or 2019, I think is gonna have. But definitely 2019, but I think 2020 is going to look a little washed out.
But it was more washed out at the beginning. If you go back, you'll see.
So it was more washed out because the I had forgotten to change to HLS. I mean, I was testing HLS on the last stream, and then I changed it back to HDR10. The HLS in Media Live isn't supporting HDLS correctly. So that's so. I tested that on the last show. Was that I tested HLG. So HLG is not going through the color pass-through on Media Live correctly. And so I switched back to HDR10. So you're absolutely right. It was washed out earlier today. It's not washed out now. Now it's looking the way it should because I moved in the AJA FS HDR. I moved it back to HDR10, defining it as that. Next question.
All right, coming in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. He says, what's the best low, medium, and high-priced pan-tilt zoom camera for streaming?
Go ahead, John.
The low is the camera that you have, the Logitech, Paul, the one you can zoom around for $200. The mid-range, I would say anything from PTZ Optics or what's the other company? Bird's Eye. What's their name? Bird Dog. And then the high end is the Mark Roberts PTZ heads that you can put any high-end camera on it.
Yeah, and you can get it. Mark Roberts makes a lot of great PTZ heads. Also in that kind of high-end range, what we used a lot were telemetrics. So telemetrics heads with Blackmagic cameras and Cabrillo lenses. Now that's, you stack all those together and it's like $50,000 a head. so it's still, it costs real money. But yeah, those are where you get into the real high end and really heavy duty control. But you're absolutely right that the mid, I would define mid range as like on the top end is like the Panasonic BRC 1000s and the not Panasonic 150s and the Sony BRC 1000s are kind of the top of the mid range at $10,000 to $15,000 or $8,000 to $15,000 or something like that. And then there's lots of ones in between. The PTZ that I'm most interested in that I haven't tested is the Canon. Can't think of the name of it, but it's $5,000, 1-inch sensor, and 14 stops of exposure. So I've been really, with LUTs available and everything else, and so I've been really fascinated by that camera. I just haven't had time I haven't had anybody send me one to test. That's the problem. Go ahead, Paul. I can't hear you, Paul.
Okay, the BCC 950 is what John was referring to, the Logitech, and they are on sale. They have slashed the price of those way down. So I don't know how long they're going to be on the market, but if you want to get one, this would be the time to get it.
There you go. Next question.
Coming in from Jonas Dotel in Stuttgart, Germany, says, what does the panel think about the new pan-tilt zoom heads from Ross Video? A related subject.
Can you tell us a little bit about it, Jonas? I'm not familiar.
I just
Are they
saw
brand
them
new?
lately. They're brand new. They announced them in one of their live streams, but they look really cool. They have a cheaper one without a display and one with a display, so you can count down talent, be a tally, control it over that. It's completely IP based, so you can remote control it. And I haven't seen pricing yet, but they claim that it's half the price of a normally industry price for in that category, and you basically add your own camera on it. Might be really cool for.
Yeah, and one of the things that
Blackmagics.
I know that Ross does a ton of AR stuff where they're tying graphics into it. So I don't know whether these heads support that or not. But
I think they support it. Yeah, that was one of the features that it's tracking.
Yeah. So I think that it is so that's one of the big advantages is the Ross tracking is really good. So it does a really good job. The telemetry, tying up the telemetry data and the graphics within their processor. It's pretty interesting. So yeah. Next question.
Okay, coming back to Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota. It says, has anyone on the panel watched the Selena Gomez show on HBO Plus? It looked like they were using $50,000 worth of Panasonic PTZ cameras.
Go ahead, John.
So we looked at this yesterday in After Hours. She's got 5 of the Panasonic 150s in her kitchen laid out. They didn't tell us what the back end, what they were recording on, but they don't do this show live either. But they spent a lot of money on this. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's especially when you don't want a crew in the office. In the space, that's the way to do it is lots of PTCs. So it's cool. Next question.
Coming in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, says, is anyone going to watch the Get Back Peter Jackson produced doc on the Beatles just released?
Oh yeah. I'm pretty excited about that. It's interesting for Peter Jackson to take his technology, all the technology that Weta has built up and apply it to things that he's interested in. like things that Peter Jackson thinks is cool. For some reason, I just love the fact that you have this guy that just goes, I'm really into the Beatles. Like, how can I turn this all the way up? Or he did. I don't know if you saw the World War One footage that they did. Unbelievable. Like, if you get to see it, I can't. What is the name of that show? That it was a movie, and it was When We Were Men, I think, or I can't remember what. But basically, he took all of the footage that they had, tons and tons of footage from World War One. They then frame corrected all of it using all of the Weta tools. They corrected it all so that it would all go back to 24 frames a second. So whether it was recorded, because in World War One they were recording in 15, they were recording at 28, they were recording 22. They were just doing the best they could. And so they corrected all of that. Then they colorized it. Then they added sound effects. So they literally added like what they thought people were saying and all the stuff around it, so that you really feel like you had more of an experience of being there with them. And it went from being these old films to something that looked really modern, it's almost as good as some of the deep fake stuff that they've been doing with old footage. I don't know if you've seen any of the train stop or the snowball fight. Just do a search for train stop or snowball fight, and you'll see them correcting old footage into something that feels real. Anyway, so they did that he's doing that with the Beatles, and I definitely want to see it. Like, he just took a lot of old 16 millimeter film and made it look great. Go ahead, Courtney.
I watched it last night, or at least most of the first episode. I think that only the first episode is available right now, and it's in 3 episodes. And he did a masterful job of, at the very beginning, of doing just a quick historical background on the Beatles, of how they met, how they formed, where they formed up in high school, and the Quarrymen, and all of their early days before it goes into the very long, the meat of the documentary, which is this one recording, this 1 week before they were doing the live Let It Be concert, and them trying to decide. And the amazing thing is that he's cut together all these divergent, from 16 millimeter behind the scenes stuff or stills from when they were, in their teens, up to, video, 50 hertz, PAL stuff intermixed with 16 millimeter film. And he's also done sound effects, because a lot of stuff you knew was shot silent because it was old newsreel footage. They've done sound effects for us, so he's really fleshed it out and tried to sync up all the various forms of video that were in the same place and match it to the lip sync and everything. Sometimes it drifts out a little bit, but it's a pretty overwhelming experience as far as technically. And you've never seen the Beatles this young and this sharp before.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that I just love that he's just taking this, like, he's just taking all the technology and just kind of applying it. And it makes me even more excited about the fact that Unity bought Weta Digital, because that's where Unity bought all the technology being used to make these films. And there's, so far, it doesn't look like they're going to change anything. Like, they're going to leave Weta Digital alone. They want to extend the technology, not change it. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Paul McCartney, I guess he's got a house in the Hamptons, and there's a...
Paul McCartney has how can he afford the Hamptons? It's so expensive.
I don't know how I can afford it now. But it was about a month ago. It's an article in the New Yorker. I love the New Yorker.
Is it next to your rental property in the Hamptons, Paul?
I wish, Alex. I only wish. Anyway,
yours is further up.
Come on, I'm low rent. Come on.
Anyway,
no, wait. I didn't finish. He had a party, and he invited Elton John and all these people for a preview showing of the of this thing, and there are 2 parts tonight. You can watch part 1 and 2, and we're looking forward to it. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Paul McCartney said this is never going to work. This is going to be terrible. We were arguing, and then Peter Jackson, he spent 3 years in a little dark room in New Zealand producing this thing, and he calls Paul McCartney. He says, "Hey, you guys are great. You guys are getting along, and you're having a good time." So I'm looking forward to it.
No, I find it fascinating. And also, we're seeing, I think one of the things we do have to look at is that we're seeing arts kind of very interesting big spends in very interesting ways from the streaming companies that we would never see in broadcast. You know, like that they're just spending inordinate amount of money in Netflix or Apple or whatever to get that one cool thing that keeps people coming back to their platform. You know, because I think this one's on Netflix. Is that right? This one's, you know, I believe it's on Netflix.
Apple.
What's Apple?
No, it's
Sorry, no, sorry.
neither one.
Disney Plus.
Disney Plus.
Because I know that with me, I'm always looking at like all of these subscription services going, do I really need this one or do I really need that one? And then they always come up with something. I'm like, okay, I'll stay for another month. You know, that's the whole game, is some crazy, they just got to do that often enough to keep you. Next question.
It's that mouse has very deep pockets.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Douglas Carmichael says, I own 2 Dell 2415Q monitors that don't support HDR. What would I need for an HDR production display chain? I'm waiting for the M1 Pro Max Mini.
I think the LGs are probably the best solution, you know, for those. There's a variety of LG monitors that support it. I mean, obviously the Apple monitors, but those are pricey. Those will probably start coming down. Go ahead, Jonas.
I really like my Blackmagic Video Assist because it can support HDR over the HDMI. I can look at it in LUTs. That's one of the most amazing features, that I can look at a LUT at the endpoint. So I just drag YouTube over, full screen it, and then I can look at LUTs. I can look at a vector scope and see what has been done to the image. It's a great tool for HDR.
Yeah. I have to admit, when I'm streaming, I just use my phone. So because my phone is the most accurate, view of that process from an expense perspective. Of course, you can get into real numbers real fast. You know, so I'm giving you kind of more cost effective ones. There's an HDR line from Sony's, the 310s, but those are starting to get into, you know, 10 grand kind of numbers. $5,000 or $10,000 is where you start getting into real HDR monitors. So those are, So, but in the least expensive ones, definitely finding something that's capable of, you're looking for something that can do a sustained output of at least 1,000 nits. You know, that's, you know, if you're not hitting 1,000 nits in your HDR display, you're really not getting a sense of what's actually happening. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I put a link in for LG, are on Black Friday sales for about $1,000 for pretty 32-inch HDR.
Yeah, and you know, the one that we have in the office, I think, is a 55-inch LG CX series, and those start to cost, you know, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000. The big thing is once you start moving to OLED, which is really going to give you the display you want, you don't use it as a computer. You don't use it as you use it as an output display that you're going to watch video on. But you'll burn it in real quickly if you use it as a computer monitor. So you have to be very careful as you start to move into some of these. Next question.
All right, coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, says some people refer to a video village on a production set. Is this a colloquialism or is there a definitive meaning?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Not really a definitive meaning. It's a place where the producers, DOPs, anyone who's not operating the camera can see exactly what the camera operator is seeing, first and foremost, and then they can do playback there also. Sometimes it's under a sun-protected tent. You see much larger ones on commercial shoots than you tend to see on anything else because the image that they're shooting is, you know, represents their product in an under 30-second commercial. So they're really critical on what they're trying to shoot. But yeah, it's a place where the big boys can go watch, big girls, boys should be careful here, can go watch the production.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's been in use a long time, ever since they came up with Video Assist. It's the separate monitor that sees through the camera, and it's usually separate. There's usually a separate setup for the DP and the DIT to look at, which is in the tent. We usually refer to Video Village as the one where the non-combatants watch. There'll be the agency people, if you're working with children, the parents. A lot of times they'll set up a separate Video Village for the parents of the children so they can watch separate, away from the clients who may be discussing the performance out loud. So they want to keep them separated. So they separate them. And it's really true. And they even, in commercials, they separate the clients from the agency. They each have their own separate Video Village because the agency doesn't want the clients hearing what they're talking about and so on. So there's separate little video monitors set up with audio monitoring, and usually they provide headphones so that they don't have to have an open speaker unless it's far enough away from the set so that you're not going to get feedback from open microphones. But yeah, it's been around since the VHS recorder was used to do on-set recording for playback.
But yeah, I can't say the story. Yeah, keeping parents away from the producers is useful. Next question. Oh, can't hear you, Courtney.
Got to get that mouse button fixed. Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, Dropbox refers to the term distributed work to remote work. They say the word remote is meaningless if there is no center to be remote from. Distributed work is, in fact, nothing new. There's even a Wikipedia page on it. So why all the hubbub?
Because I think it's because there's so many. I think that's it's just suddenly like there's so many people and there's so many people that want to do this thing. And so I think that the reason that there's so much hubbub at the moment, as far as a distributed workflow, we've been doing this for decades, to your point. A lot of us have been building those up and building pipelines for that. And the reason that's a big deal now is because suddenly everyone was forced into it. People who weren't doing it got forced into it. So it became a new thing and it was exciting and scary and all those other things. Next question.
This comes in from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. It says, do you format and reuse, label, or rename your T5 drives? And if so, what is your naming convention?
I have many. This is a small stack of the T5 drives that I have laying around. And definitely reuse them all the time. And it depends on the show as far as what we name them. Go to Roscoe.
Mine are Cam 1, Cam 2, Cam 3, and Cam 4 because I'm using them right on board the Pocket 6Ks, and so I'm just naming them whatever that camera is.
So to exactly what Roscoe said, we name them by the camera if we're going to attach them to a camera, and we set them all up that way. If they're general purpose drives, I name them typically after Roman or Indian gods. Like that's so there's Mercury and Shiva and like all these different things, and I name them after those two things because there's just lots of them available. And when I see one of those, I know it's not a camera drive. So if I see the name, I just know that what it is.
And I do gold, silver, and bronze.
Yeah, I just have so many. See, the best thing about Indian gods is there's like 2 million of them. The problem is that after the first 50, they're really hard to pronounce. So next question.
I call mine Beelzebub.
Beelzebub. Oh. I don't know if I put my data there. It's going straight to hell. All right.
Well, I guess this is the last question for the first hour here. Michael Drosty in Peoria, Illinois says, how do people use their Stream Decks? Could be a long answer.
We'll try to make it quick. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I like to use it with my Mix FX Pro. As you can see, it's a 32-button control, and there's a zillion different adjustments. There are actually 72 pages on there to play with, so it works for me.
Go ahead, Jonas.
I use it with Universe, and I use it to jump into cloud machines, so it just opens up nice GCV with the correct machine to have fast access.
Go, Jeffrey.
I have two Stream Decks going on. First Stream Deck, I have my switching of all my cameras. Over here I have companions set up so I can flip between pages. Right now it's got my PTZ presets on there. Second Stream Deck is the 15 button. This is where I have a lot of programs and a lot of pages, soundboards on there. All the office hour stuff is on here, and extra switching so I can use left or right hand if I need to.
That's great. Awesome. We are now changing subjects to second hour. It's a second hour about the second hours. We do this every once in a while where we just go, okay, so what do we want to see? And kind of have an open discussion about the next month or two of stuff that we'd like to see as I start to get ready to schedule all of that. So anyway, we're I thought we'd open it up. It was a good Sunday, or not Sunday, but Friday, Thanksgiving Friday for us, discussion to have. We are starting to pick up speed. As I said, the next week is a little bit in flux. Well, I'm sure we'll have a good bunch of second hours, but my real goal was starting the week after that. We're just going to turn the dials all the way up and try to have every single one of these see something we really, really, really want to see. So I wanted to get feedback from people as we start to work on that. So anyway, so let's go ahead. We'll just use these as an opportunity. Let's go ahead with some of the suggestions first, and then we'll come back to the panelists to talk more about it. Let's jump into the first suggestion.
Well, it's from Craig McFarlane in Boston. He says, similar to hoteling cubicles, if that is a word, or offices, I'd like recommendations for hoteling small media rooms for staff to go to use higher quality video, audio, echo, and backdrop. Staff would bring their own laptops.
I think this is going to be a big business. We went through a proposal process actually with WeWork in the before times, and probably a couple years before the before times. So I think we were doing the presentations for them in 2018. They just couldn't get their head around it. It was really funny. They're like, "Why would people want to stream from a WeWork?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like you have no idea. Like this is going to be huge." Anyway, so it didn't work out. But I think to your point, I think there's a huge opportunity to build micro studios that are micro studios that are available to folks. And I think that figuring out what those things need to be, we've thought about them a fair bit. So I think that'd be a great second hour. And for whoever's listening, if these don't go into the second hour thing in Discord, I'll forget that we talked about them. So I do think that they're a little bit related to the $20,000 studio that I talked about. Although I think that if I was going to build a hoteling studio, I'd probably spend more money on it than less, because you can amortize that over a lot of people. And everything you do around hoteling is going to be around efficiency, because you got to make sure that you can run it from remote and so on and so forth. But I think that'd be great. Be a great second hour. Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
I'd say there's both hoteling and an external, selling it to an external customer, and then there's also hoteling within a company. And I think a lot of universities are already doing hoteling within the company because the students don't have resources.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's definitely put that in the second hour. It sounds like a great second hour. Next question. Or no, go ahead, Paul, real quick before we go.
Why not take another run at WeWork, Alex?
Yeah, I might. I'm kind of in a different place now. But we might. I mean, at the time it was going to be like, we're taking, it was so funny that to do something that basically ended middle of 2019. That all we tried to do is we were going to put, how do we run remote studios, and how do we build up virtual events, and how do we do all these things with nodes all over the world, and just couldn't find an investor. So anyway, next question.
Coming in from Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington, says, how do we keep a second hour guest from going into robotic demo mode?
Go ahead, Mark.
One way would be just to send out an agenda or questions ahead of time, and not so far in advance to get to prep for it, but just enough that breaks there.
The big thing is that we've actually done that a little bit at times, and it's actually made it worse, because then they want to address all those things at the top of the hour. So this is what I would say mostly is this is a responsibility of me and eventually the team that manages this. And I've been trying to figure it out, of really setting up their expectations. And the funny thing is the ones that don't work are usually the ones that I give the least amount of prep to. And so I just have to get better at like knowing that there'll be someone that I know is going to do it. And I go, oh, they'll be fine. And I just don't do a lot of prep for them, because I'm already prepping, spending so much time with other people that I'm prepping. And I get lazy, and then they have long presentations. And so the big thing that when I'm prepping them properly, we rarely hit that. But what I tell them is, you have 5 or 10 minutes to present. That's it. Like, you just got to get that you should have a bunch of examples that you can jump back to when people ask questions. But how to tell your story in 10 minutes is really the game, And I said, we can stretch it out to 15, but that's it. That's how much time you have. And this was something that I learned a lot in working with tech TV with Leo. I learned a lot about, I had a 7-minute window. And what I used to do is try to take 15 minutes and push it into 7, and I'd be talking really, really fast. And every time Leo asked a question, I was like, oh no, I'm screwed. I'm not going to be able to get through the end of this segment. Then I learned very quickly, instead of doing this, why don't I just have 3.5 minutes of content? So I just backed in and I said, what can I comfortably do in 3.5 minutes? And then the segments were perfect. Leo asks the questions he wants to ask. We go back and forth. It's very comfortable. I showed something cool. Everyone walks away and they're happy. Now, there was a lot of work to get to 3.5 minutes. Like, I pre-cooked a lot of things and put everything in, but the idea was I can walk through this comfortably. In the same way, I need to prep people better about, hey, I'm going to ask you questions for the first 10 minutes. Now, the other side of that, just as, there's a two-way thing with this, is that what I will say is that it's our responsibility as panelists and our responsibility as producers to make sure that when I come out of that, there's going to be a ton of questions. So as I turn up the volume on this, it's really like we've had a couple shows that were really buffeted by Douglas and Rupert, and then like if they weren't there, we would have had a really dead show, and so we need to as a group know that for us to bring in more higher level people and for me to tell them to speak not very long, what scares me, and you'll see me stretch this thing out, is if no one asks any questions in the first 5 minutes, and really ahead of time, I'm going to allow that speaker to talk in 20 minutes long because I'm afraid that they're going to run short. So now I've also started to prep I've also started to manage their expectations of, hey, this might only last 30 minutes. It might not be an hour. It's however long people are there, but it's, if I can shorten what they say and cut them off and prep them, but there's a two-way communication there, which is that it's really incumbent on the producers and the panelists to look at what we're talking about a day or two in advance, do some research. And if everybody writes down one question, you don't have to have lots of questions, just one. It doesn't, if a small percentage of our viewers ask one question during the show, we have plenty for the hour. So it's not like you have, and so that's the thing, is just look at things and try to find the one question you want to ask. And then see if other people might have asked it as well, and then vote on that one. But the point is stack those up. I will say for second hours, it really feels like you're going into the darkness when I enter a second hour with one question. Just as a host, just so you know, that's stressful. like I just don't know what's going to happen next, and so that you're really like just taking a train into a tunnel, and you're just like, okay, we'll see how this goes. So as we as a group get better at asking questions ahead of time, what that does is it gives me as a host, when you ask questions before the show starts or in the first hour, for the second hour, when I see that there's 8 questions or 10 questions that are stacking up for someone in the second hour, I want to get them off their thing as fast as possible. I will move them to the questions almost, I'll let them do a little. Now, one thing I have learned is don't just go into questions, because it doesn't let them have any control, any of the narrative. So they have things that they want to talk about, and we have things we want to hear from them. Like we've had the ones where we started asking questions on something some of us really knew, and people, like someone asked later, like, what is Parsec? Because we jumped into the question so fast that there wasn't like a setup. So there has to be a setup so that we get all of our producers on the same, place, right? But that's it. Like a setup can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes max. But as a host, I need you to ask questions, and not just Douglas and Rupert, but I need everyone to ask questions and vote those questions up and really stack that up. It's really, and then it makes me more comfortable about bringing different voices into the second hour, because I just get worried that I'm going to bring someone in and they're going to, and we're going to have, dead air. Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Did we lose Paul? We lost Paul. Go ahead, Liberty.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it, because I was going to ask, isn't that then where the host kind of jumps in and kind of tries to maybe steer them back, even having some background information on what they're speaking about, to bring them back up? Because they know the information so much, they like go off of this train.
And we're a very different group. Like we're very interactive, and we're also very unforgiving when it comes to, like I just watch when someone does a presentation, this group more than any other group, someone starts throwing up slides that aren't really engaging with text on them or whatever, and the viewership just goes off a cliff. Like it's just like, I'm like, wow, like it's just like, it's really amazing how quickly people just go, oh, I'm not going to watch this, and so. And I try to explain that to people, that it's really going to be about the interaction between everybody, and we need enough information. Now, what really works is to have them to have maybe some images or other examples that they want to show, but just wait for it to come up in questions, rather than try to show everything that you want. But I don't think that we're that different from everyone. I think that we're just more reactive to it. I think that the reality is all these slide decks were boring everybody for the last decade, like, and we just, we're just like, but we know, we just have tasted what it could be like, in some of our best shows. And so we know we know what steak's supposed to be like. You're not feeding us that. And so we're just like, okay, we're leaving, and other people are just still used to the gruel that they've had for the last 10 years. So I think that's the distinction, Courtney.
Yeah, this puts a little more weight on you, Alex. But what might work better is if you, ahead of time when you're booking the person, have them submit to you a little bio that shows their background, so that you can, and tell them you need to prepare an introduction that covers, a little bit of biographical information and whatever the product or service that they want to represent on the show. And then you can then have them tell them to prepare their elevator pitch. We used to always call that, which is like a 1 to 2 minute pitch on the product or service that they're going to discuss on the show. So just to give everyone a good background before we go into questions. And you've set them up by in the introduction of, this is typical in a show where you're bringing somebody out in a live show to introduce them, to explain their background, where they came from, and what they're up to now. And
I usually set them up with, that's what I'm going to do. And the ones that we get in trouble with is that the ones that I've seen them do something else live before or something else like that, and I feel like they really know what they're doing. And I go, oh, I don't need to go through that spiel with them. And that doesn't work. So it's like that's been the problem. But I've had people like throw out, they've said, okay, well, we have this presentation. And I'm like, you can't show that. Like, I'm just letting you know, you can't put that up. Like, it's, and so we definitely have some back and forth, to your point. I do think we can get a lot more organized about it. There should be a PDF or even a web. What I'd like to do is work with Ken on a web page that I just send them to, that's active, that we just constantly are updating. Like, these are the things you need to know. And these are the other thing that I just can't seem to, like, I say it and they seem to hear it, but people still come in on their home computers with their open mics, with the mic on their computer and everything else. And I'm kind of like, it's just, that's a bummer. Like, it's a bummer, because it's and eventually part of my goal in turning up the quality and making sure that we ask lots of if we make this the best forum in the world to show off your product, that creates more demand, and that demand gives me more leverage. And that leverage means that I get to tell them, you're going to have to come in with a good camera and mic, or I'm not going to have you on I need to get to a point where I'm not asking people to be on a show. I need to get to a point where PR people are hitting me up all the time wanting to be on the show. And once I get to that point, I can start turning the screws, on the quality. Like, I want people to come in. I just want to make sure that they turn up all those things and invest in what it takes to keep up with our show, and that's part of the back and forth. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Those are all great stuff, and good luck in that part, getting them to upgrade their computers and things like that. I've tried many times. Getting back to the track of the second hour, maybe we should have a ruthless review for second hour guests, where we would have like 3 or 4 people sign up in the panel, sign up. They're going to have like a 10 to 12 minute presentation on something. Whatever they're good at, audio, video, whatever. And then we kind of go through and say, okay, you could have done this better. I liked how you did this.
You mean this is like a pre-show, some kind of after hours or some kind of separate?
No. This is a ruthless review, except we're not doing audio or video. We're doing your presentation, so we can understand how the presentations work. We can understand how to scan it. So if I bring a guest in,
no presentation works. Like that's what I would say, is that in general, their presentations don't work.
I totally get it. But my point is that way the rest of the panel gets familiar with what to see when they bring on a guest, and they can help them out. So then we can distribute the work throughout. So that's my suggestion, is the ruthless review second hour for presentations, to try and tighten it down. Maybe even get a good list of things so we can send it to a second hour guest.
I mean, I think that the problem is that I think that Felipe and Steven probably pull it off better than anyone else as far as presentations go. But outside of that, I think that there is almost no presentations that I've seen that if there's a slide deck involved, they're probably in trouble. And it's not that you can't do a good slide deck. It's just that no one does a good slide deck. like except for them, except for Felipe and Steven, because they don't utilize Keynote. Like if you're not using Keynote, you don't even bother. Like don't bother showing a slide, for us, because it's not going to be high enough quality to be usable. And then, putting up an image to show it makes sense. Like here's an image, here's a video, here's something that we do, I think makes sense. Having any kind of organized presentation, I think for the most part is hard. I think that, we've had, again, we've had people in the past be able to show slide decks of images and talk over them and stuff like that have been very engaging. But I think that those are all different challenges. But I think that the real thing is just more prep for them. And then again, really having us as panelists and producers really take on that. I actually don't ask certain groups to come on the show because I'm just afraid there won't be enough questions. It's just like, I don't know how that's going to go. And so we just have to, if I always know that we're going to enter the hour with 5 or 10 questions, it makes me much more aggressive about wanting to go out and find folks that we can bring in. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I'm sort of piggybacking on what Courtney said, that one of the things that I think has worked for me with conversations with Tony Mobley is that I ask all of the people who are going to be guests to give me a picture and a brief bio. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I do. And we've been experimenting with me actually having, a short or brief conversation with that person prior to the actual conversations with Tony Mobley. And that has made a tremendous amount of difference because I can sort of, the chemistry is sort of built in just based on having that brief conversation.
Right.
And so I think that can be helpful. And I'm still trying to figure it out, but that was working.
I definitely meet with almost every person that comes on. So unless they're coming from inside our group, I meet with every external vendor before they come on, because it's absolutely necessary. And I have to meet them over Zoom to make sure that if they can't get into Zoom, I know it ahead of time. Next question.
Coming in from Lucas Herzog in Mainz. He says, I really like the second hour about essential tools. Could we do a what's in your kit again?
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and throw that in the second hour. I think that would totally make sense because our kits are always changing. Next question.
From Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York. He said, could Mickey and Jim do a deep dive on the BSS?
Yeah, this is the BOSS 806. There's a bunch of us using them, and they're really cool. And I think that would be a great second hour. Next question.
Another one from Tlaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman says, can Chad do a second hour on his powerfully effective style of background producing?
I think we can. We have to drag Chad in. He's going to have to turn his window on.
Is the Chadinator listening?
Chadinator. I think that there is one of the things I want to do on Mondays is Mondays I'm looking at dedicating to office hours things. Just things about our mechanics. I know we're doing that on Friday today, but in general, I'd like to do a Mobley process second hour and a Belfast method second hour, and just updates on what we're learning. It doesn't have to be finished, but like what we're learning and what we're not learning. By the way, Richard is another person I failed to mention. Does great. His keynotes are amazing. So I don't want to leave Richard. As soon as I said Belfast method, I was like, oh, Richard does really good. I'm always like, Richard can present anytime he wants on our show because of his anytime he says, oh, I've got something else to show, I'm like, okay, when? So he's got great decks. And anyway, so but I think that updates on those processes are something that and then updates on how we run the show. I think talking about Office Hours 2.0 on Thursdays makes sense, but I also think that we could talk about all the mechanics of how we produce shows and so on and so forth. I think that'd be useful. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, he says, what can the office hours community do to ensure that the second hour guests walk away with a piece of work that they can be proud of, that they immediately want to share with their colleagues and clients?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, maybe the team that does last week in office hours, it's Ken, Rotem, and Leo, do an edited piece for the second hour for that vendor. That might be something to discuss.
I think that in general, we're very close to producing second hours that the vendor would just want to link to, like where it's clean. Now, there's a couple things I've been thinking about related to that. One is that I need to get better about making the transition from the first hour to the second hour. I just have to think about how I want to do that transition and be more rigorous with myself, or whoever's hosting needs to be more rigorous than I've been. I kind of do it informally, going from one to the other. You'll notice that when you have external guests, I just cut off whatever conversation we're having and start at the top of the hour. Or you'll also notice sometimes I'll start pushing questions back at like 7:57. And then there was one a couple of days ago where I pushed it too quickly and it was like 7:57 and I answered a question. If you're wondering why I pushed all these questions back and then I answered for 3 minutes, is that I suddenly realized I had too much time. So I just went like this and just filled because I wasn't going to put another question in. So it was because I didn't know they had all been sent back. They had been sent back to people's notes. I didn't have a question to go to. So I just stretched, so anyway, so I think that getting that transition working better, we really need our panelists to not shift so much right at the top of the hour. So that makes it hard for me because suddenly all these windows start moving around because people are leaving. If you're going to leave, I think that we need to have panelists leave at 7:50. Like 7:50, you just need to, if you're not going to be here for the second hour, you just need to leave early so that we settle it down, because there's a whole bunch of stuff, especially for Office Hours 2.0. Panelists leaving and coming and going is really hard on our system. Now we'll eventually get better at it, but just know that if you show up, as we get going, we're going to be more resistant to people just showing up for the second hour or leaving after the first hour is going to become more and more of an issue for us. It's leaving is generally okay. It's leaving and coming back is the hard part. Like, you can turn off your window, but dropping out is a thing on our end. It breaks the system. So I think that we have to do that. The other thing is that if you're going to stay for the second hour, we really need the panelist to be 100% attentive. I will say that I don't say it during the show, but I'm mortified when someone takes a call, is talking on some other thing, is eating or whatever. I am mortified. Just so you know, like, I'm mortified. Like when you do that as a panelist, I am just like, I can't believe they're doing that. Like, it's just like, who raised these kids? So we have a guest, and so that's that's what goes through my head. I don't usually call people out on it, but I'll say in general that's not okay, and so, because what we want to do, we have to remember that it's not just that we're in front of 500 or 200 people or whatever during. First, imagine what would you do if you're in front of 200 people on a stage. Then imagine that 1,000 people will watch later, and then imagine that the vendor would go. Because what's really good for our group is that the vendor goes, "Oh, I'm going to put a link out to that because it was such a great hour and everything was perfect, and that's something I want every customer to see is me talking about it." And we're 90% there. It's just these weird little things that we do that we have to, the informality that we have to kind of take out to take it to that next level. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, just a clarification for us panelists that on the dropping out and coming back, you mean if we drop out but don't be pushed back to attendee, but stay as a panelist, but just leave the meeting?
Yeah, we'll have to talk to Andy about it. Let's talk to Andy about it, because I think if you just stay in and turn off your Zoom camera, turning your camera to black, like turning your ATEM switcher to black, which we do in the pre-show a lot. I do it a lot. That is not good during the show for the new system. And we're learning all these things as we did it. It wasn't a problem before. But in general, it's better to just go ahead and turn your Zoom camera off. What's really not good is to drop out. So dropping out of the page, like dropping out of Zoom.
Leave the meeting, in other words.
Leaving the meeting or leaving your position as a panelist. So going back to the attendee and then coming back in, or dropping out completely and then coming back in. Like what's going to happen?
The clarification, because if you leave without being set back by a co-host to attendee, if you just leave the meeting and then come back into the meeting, you should come back up as a panelist without.
I know, which is chaotic. That's the worst thing.
That's the problem. Okay, that's what I wanted to get clear.
That's the thing we want to try to avoid. So it causes a lot of chaos on our end. There's probably going to be some point where I start locking the meetings. At some point, like it'll be like at 8:05, I just lock it, and so no one can come in and out because of the back and forth is problematic. So and it may end up being at 8 o'clock. We just lock it. Like as soon as I see the guests that are supposed to be here, I have what I need, and I'm just going to lock the meeting. And this becomes less of an issue. It actually becomes a non-issue starting in January, so I don't need to talk too much about it because once we get to January, there won't be a webinar, and once we get to that, we have to manually drag you into the breakout room that you're going to be in to be a panelist. So it will be much more mechanical at that point. You won't be able to come back in. Like you won't be able to leave and come back in. You'll leave and you won't be able to come back in. So, and we probably in the second hour, what would be easier for us is to have people just, if they're going to leave, like jump out of Zoom, just to not, that's the end of their day. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, so the panel when somebody starts presenting in a second hour and they're the only question answerer person, then the purpose of the panel is just really kind of to be there as an audience, because we can all interact by just typing in questions. Our faces don't necessarily have to be on the screen.
The advantage of being a panelist during that second hour, I've thought about that a lot, actually, it's a great question, is that the panelists do have the luxury of, if you ask a question and you're in the panel, I will call on you to explain what your question is. So you actually have the opportunity as a panelist. Now, I have one guest coming up in the not too distant future that I can't do that with. Like they just want to have it be, they want to just not have a bunch of other panelists, in the space. So that'll be a different thing that we have to think about. We have some guests that just aren't used to they're not used to our crazy ways. And so we have to gently ease them into that process. And so, anyway, but for the most part, the advantage of being a panelist in the second hour is being able to explain your question, because I will throw it to you if it looks like it. If you have your hand up, I will generally throw it to a panelist to explain what their question is. And now, if they ask a lot of them, I'm not going to throw it to you every single time. But if you have a question as a panelist and it comes up, I'm going to throw it to you. I'm not going to throw it to you every single question, but if you have, I'll usually let you interject if there's something specific you're trying to do. But that's the advantage of being there.
And are we concerned about the look of just 5 people being left in the panel or something along those lines? Is that
not really, because you won't see it in the new version very often. But again, I would there. I mean, from a panelist point of view, it's not bad to be. I mean, from a video perspective, to be part of the thing when we're working in a second hour, it's not bad to be in the gallery and to be seen. It's there's a little bit of that. That's not a bad thing from a personal marketing. Next question.
All right, coming in from James Babbitt in San Diego. He says, can we have a second hour focusing on James Burke? Well, what is the connection to that?
I am working on it. I'm a James Burke fanatic. So anyway, and here's the worst part. I used to have his email and I can't find it again. I'm bad with emails. Anyway, so James Burke, of course, is the core of most of my training methodology and Alton Brown's training methodology, and both. I'm trying to get Alton Brown as well as James Burke on the show. We don't have quite enough juice just yet, but that's part of the thing as we start to turn this thing up. James Burke has just got, I think he'd probably say yes almost immediately if I could actually get directly to him. He's just got a lot of filtering around him. Next question.
Comes in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, says, do we need to be careful about inviting competing vendors too quickly, one after the other?
Yes. So I think about it. Definitely not in the same week. I think it only just can't be in the same week. And generally, because we have different subject matters we're targeting, I don't think that we're in too much stress about doing that. But I definitely think about that process. I also try to think about vendors that I try to look for vendors that we really care about, or that I think that we'll care about. as opposed to just bringing in vendors. Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. If you've been to a super meet or some of those things that Charles used to run, or they used to run during NAB and that kind of stuff, it's interesting when you have Avid, Apple right on the same, docket, if you want to say it, and they go back to back. And basically at that point in time, they're all just showing off their new features. So it's much more of a marketing presentation, I guess, in that sense. And they're just trying to get people to understand their new features. But I don't necessarily disagree with having people pretty close to each other, so you get a real definitive definition between how the two products differ.
I mean, I think we can do 1 week to the next. I mean, again, I think that Mondays, what we're kind of leaning towards is more like office hours stuff. Fridays is more infrastructure kind of things. And then Tuesdays is audio, Wednesdays is video, and Thursdays are going to eventually be kind of talent. And so I think that it would be unusual for us to have two vendors that are competing back to back, one day to the next, unless we, extended office hours to a second and third hour, which may happen someday.
Well, we've never put Guy on the spot, but there are people out there too that are very good at talking between different products from vendors. Do we consider them also a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think that also, we could have ones where we just talk about. I mean, it could be a little bit fractious, but what DAW do you use? That could be just a general second hour where we just all talk about it. But I don't think we need the vendors here for that. I mean, we just need to make sure that we have, and there's definitely ones like there are certain audio discussions, for instance, that I do that I reach out to people within our group, like, are you going to be here on Tuesday, or are you going to be here on Friday? And I won't schedule it until I have critical mass of people that can answer the questions. Next question. Can't hear you, Courtney.
Can Courtney get a new mouse? That's the next question. Mark Giuliani in Alexandria, Virginia says, can Alex host a second hour on Keynote and Motion that shows some of the things that the tools can be used to prepare? In other words, transitions, lower thirds, etc. Yeah,
no, definitely put that in the second hour. I'm happy to talk about it. I think I did we did a little bit of the live video into it, which I'm really working on right now. But yeah, happy to talk about it. Keynote. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, says, what would you think of a second hour or series on music theory, along with deep dives into specific genres of electronic music?
Deep dives in general would be great. Yeah, I think that if we just have, if we can get the right people on, I think it'd be great to talk about what it means to do certain things, because I don't know any of them. I just go, this sounds good, so I think that'd be great. Next question.
Comes in from...
and again, as a quick reminder, is make sure to put these in the second hour. We can talk about them all here. I will not remember any of this. So it's really, really important to put it into the second hour suggestions. This is kind of us pulling up all of the stuff, discussing it, brainstorming, and then get it into that second hour, because that's what I use as my little cheat sheet to try to figure out what we're doing next. Go ahead.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, he says, do second hours always need to finish on time out of respect for the guests' time?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I think if the guest is having fun, no. I mean, if they're having fun, some people really enjoy this environment of, they're anyways, it's just, I'd say no, it doesn't have to end on time for their benefit.
In the pre-show, I generally ask them, I mean, when I have my pre-event meeting with them, I usually ask them if they're available after the hour or not. So you'll notice that some of ours have gone as late as 9:30, 9:40. And that's because I had a very specific conversation with them of, do you have the time to do that? So I don't want to, I don't assume that they want us to go long, because they have no way in front of us to tell me. They don't have no easy way to tell me that they got to go. So that's the other issue. And generally, the other times that we've stopped really, really on time have been mostly due to the fact that I'm hosting and I have to go somewhere else, and I feel like the transition will be weird. But we're going to be slowly moving to have other hosts, and so that'll be a little easier, and I can kind of schedule that into that process. Next question.
Coming in from Tulaloc, Miguel Lopez Waterman in Astoria, New York, says, I would love to do a second hour on lighting control. We did DMX long ago. Is it time to revisit?
Tulaloc, if you're doing it, absolutely put it in there. Say, I would love to do that. We'll get it in within the next couple of weeks. I'd love anytime you want to talk about stuff. I'm ready to have you on the show. It's a huge value. Next question.
Another one from Tullock. It says, I think the second hour on Universe would, without the vendor, with people like Jonas, Jim, and Manolo, would be fantastic. They're doing some fascinating things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think some of that's going to come out in doing some behind the scenes of just where we are with the Belfast method and the Mobley process and what we're going to be doing with the cooking and everything else. And so I think that us just showing behind the scenes of that will touch on it. But I think having with most of these, we brought the vendors on because not a lot of people knew it, and it was great to have the vendor come on and talk about it. But I think now we could definitely have Isadora hours or Universe hours once a month that were just kind of like a user group meeting, for some of these within our group as a second hour, and just talk through what we're learning and what we're doing. I think that would make a lot of sense. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, he says, is there an ideal balance between second hours with vendors or featured guests versus second hours just on focused subjects with the panel?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I'd love to see a voting system on what second, one. I know, Alex, this is like asking a big thing. Oh, give us 5 choices and we'll tell you out of the 5, we'll rank them for you or vote on them. Maybe we'll get there.
We have some of that, and that's called putting your thumb up. And I pay a lot of attention to how many people put their thumb up for a
second
for
hour
a subject
idea
and a second
in
hour
Discord.
idea.
Yeah,
that is the voting right now. Like if there's like 9 or 10 votes for something, I will immediately be trying to figure out how do I make that work. If there's none, or if there's 1 or 2, it's definitely like, if I think it's interesting, if it's 1 or 2, if I think it's interesting, we'll do it. Or if it's easy to do, I'll do it. If it's 8 or 9, I start going, okay, I gotta I start organizing my head around like how to get some of those done.
And to remain timely, I don't think there's an ideal balance. I don't think you can come up with a formula. I think sometimes things are just fascinating. Blackmagic Design announces something, and then we just go there, and we can spend 2 or 3 days there sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that I will admit that I'd like to get to a point where it's probably 2 or 3 days of the week we have a guest, and then there's 2 or 3 days of the week that we have our own discussions. It's kind of half and half, like a little bit one way or the other, not all vendors, not all. But I think that there's a real value for us as a group to be bringing in these vendors and being able to, get incredible, like if you look at Parsec and even the AJA one before that, we got so much information so quickly, like we can learn a lot about those, and we can keep on talking about all the other stuff in pieces. It is nice to have a focused discussion on it. Every time I think about that, I think of new people. Like Carl does really good presentations. That one that he did about recording orchestras that Carl did was really good. So Carl also does good keynotes. All right, next question.
From Ray Howard in Avondale, Arizona, says, how about a second hour focused on those of us who are solo event producers in the shallow end of the production pool? Focused discussion on approaches to doing things on a tight budget.
Yeah, I think it's a great one. Definitely put that in the second hour. I think that one totally makes sense. Almost all of us started there. My first one was with a laptop and a webcam. And so it's just, where do we go from there? Next question.
Comes in from Jonas Dotel in Stuttgart, Germany. Says, could we do a little stinger between first and second hour to make a cleaner transition? Little graphics excitement to it.
Yeah, I think we could. Yes, there needs to be some kind of transition. What it looks like, I think over next month we have to play with. Like, what does that transition look like? I want to be kind of careful of not being too flashy. I kind of want all the graphics to always just support what we're doing. But I think something where we go, okay, and maybe, disco lights. No, just kidding. No, so I don't know. But I do think that something visually that, I'll be honest with you, one of the things we want to do is start cutting it so it may fade to black and then come up with a transition or a head, thing or whatever. It's mostly so that we could cut it in YouTube and put it out as its own second hour. So I kind of want to think about that transition of a way to make it easy for us to, and you'll notice that I've been practicing that for months, because I always stop and say, okay, we're changing subjects. That's my transition. But you'll notice that there's always, before almost every second hour, there's a gap of about a second, of audio that I do, just to make sure that if we want to cut that second hour, and it's mostly me just training myself to do it, knowing that eventually we'll want to do that. Next question.
Coming in from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana, says, is a second hour on Zoom ISO with those using it and the ways they are using it? Andy's great, but I'd love to hear people's use cases.
Yeah, I think having people's use cases, I would always want to have Andy here as well, just because he can answer a lot of technical questions related to it. But I think having different people showing how they're using ISO would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, what would you think of a second hour about the convergence of IT and media technology skills and looking at marketable opportunities for people with both skill sets?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, that tech or some kind of technical guru discussion of what it takes to in today's stuff could make sense. We just got to figure out how to package it. I don't think that by itself is the right package. I just got to think about how to put it together. Go ahead, Liberty.
I think this kind of goes into the question that I asked that's probably coming up, is just what are those outlier industries that we touch on? And maybe that's where there's something consistent, where it's a fusion of marketing, media, and that coming together, because we are seeing that there's a growing need for people with converging skill sets. So I think that's a great suggestion, Douglas.
Next question.
This one from Craig McFarlane in Boston says, how about a futures second hour to remark on the trends in various technologies and new opportunities for individuals or businesses?
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Like just things that we see coming. We talk about that a lot in the show, in little bits and pieces as they come up. But it'd be good to have a second hour of just what we think are emerging opportunities in media. I think doing that every quarter. I think a lot of these are things that we could do almost every quarter. So we want to kind of think of that, because that makes, I will say, pattern-oriented stuff like, oh, we want to talk about these things once a month. We want to talk about these things once a quarter. Makes it a lot easier for us to schedule because we just start kind of building up against those. Next question.
The crystal ball hour. All right, yeah. From Guy Cochran in Seattle, USA, says, what would you consider to be some of the best second hour sessions and what made them great?
Go ahead, John.
My funnest ones were all the guys from Twit, the Twit hosts, all those guys, Renee and Andy, and of course Leo. But my scientifically best show, whatever that word is, scientifically,
yeah,
was the one objectively was the one with Mr. Wright of compositing and color theory. Yeah. We could have talked for another 5 hours on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to Roscoe.
Well, and if they're not personality specific or people specific, how often could we revisit them? Would be a good question too. If we like them, we could go back.
Yeah. That's I think that I think we definitely could go back to them, and I think we should. I think because we'll always do them better. I just think it just depends on which ones, And I also feel like there's so much to cover that when do we go back to them, and do we just go back to them in questions that come up in the first hour? A lot of it is the second hour is kind of like introducing a topic that hopefully gets us thinking, and then you can keep on asking those questions down the road rather than spending more time on it. But I agree with you.
And do we keep onboarding by after hours? So if somebody comes in and say, I know you did a great show on the ATEM Mini ISO Extreme, and then says, I need to help with mine. That's an after hours thing. Yeah. Not really. Yeah,
exactly. Go ahead, Liberty.
I will always say like the AWS one earlier this year, where it was almost like we had a series of them and they actually demoed and we could walk through. So but that might be replaced now because we have labs in after hours, but any demoing one is typically a good second hour.
Yeah. I think that people walking through things, I think that the funny thing about it is that I do find that I watch people, if there's too much demo in the second hour, people tend to glaze a little bit, so I will admit that in my head, I've kind of gotten into this. Those are good after hours discussions. The AWS one stands out as incredible amount of work, really well tightened together. We really understood the whole thing. So I agree with you that those themselves are great. I think they're hard to reproduce because I have a feeling that those guys spent a lot of time working on that. And so I do think they would be great if we can get people to put that kind of effort into it. But I do think that, and I think you could almost do that one again. Like it would be easier for them to do it a second time to refresh us, because a lot of us have gotten further along in AWS than we were the last time. This gets back to what Roscoe's comment is, do we refresh, those? We've done a couple where I will say, part of my opinion is we've covered a couple subjects twice and our viewership on the second one has been low. So that's been I can't remember what it was, but there's a couple of them that we've come back to a couple times, and it's viewership hasn't been great, and so I measure that. I tend to be a data person, so I'm constantly watching all the numbers, like how many people are watching on different things, like during the show, and making decisions about whether we did a good thing or not. So when we finish a second hour at 100 people, to me that's like that didn't work. When we finish it at within Zoom, when we finish it at 135 or higher, then I consider it a success. Like it was like, okay, that was good. I mean, that's the current measure that I have around it, is I'm watching all this stuff. And, really what I'm looking for is 185 to 200 people in the live one. Of course, our numbers are never as high as they were before we opened up YouTube, which is why I did that for a long time with YouTube, is I wanted to get critical mass, because at that point with YouTube, we were at, 280, 300. A lot of that got taken away to time shifting. So people started time shifting those, and so those overall numbers came down. But I think that, what I'm shooting for is, in the current structure of how many people watch, the 185 to 210 is kind of where I'm trying to keep us in that world, knowing that there'll be another 600, 800, 1,000 watching later. As we start to really promote this and push it down the path, obviously those numbers will go up. But I don't know. As a show, I don't know. I'm not in any rush, just to say this, I'm not in any rush to grow the numbers, because there's a bunch of technology that I have to implement on the back end to manage audiences larger than 300 that I have to keep. We know what they are. We've done them in the past. It's just that they're not in Mukana, the current Mukana at the time. And so we just have to do a bunch of other things. So I'm in no rush to move up any faster. Next question.
Coming in from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, says, how can the panel have more engagement with the guests? High question velocity second hours can feel like an interrogation of the guest when there is no follow-through on a long series of brief guest answers, i.e. Mukana's panel answering module.
Well, I think that's, if a panelist asks a question and they want to follow up on it, I think that's where panelists can be useful in that area. I'm also sensitive to the fact that when we have a lot of questions, we're not going to get them back. So I will say, where I'm much more sensitive to trying to get no question left behind when we have a vendor, because, when are they going to come back again? Or, and so the big thing is that I like the high velocity of, we're just pulling up all this information from them, as fast as we can, out of them. And so I try not to have the questions last too long. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that maybe we need to have a little bit of homework when we know that we're going to have a guest ahead of time, so that we can do a little background for ourselves, so that we can ask intelligent questions and informed questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, it seems like Mukana doesn't really allow you to do the kind of the back and forth with a guest. It's wonderful to just watch you go back and forth with a guest, but I think, it's awkward for you to the question to be posed and then you just to not go to the guest, but then say, oh, and suddenly, Roscoe, you're going to interject something. There's a little bit of a awkwardness there on exactly how that flows.
Yeah, and admittedly, I think right now my goal with this is I actually want to spin through those. There's another way to do this that we've done in the past, which that goes faster, which is that we allow other people we can slow the video answers down if we augment it with text answers. So you have other people in the company answering questions from a vendor specifically. So we've done that where we've had like 6 people in the back end like answering questions that are coming in. So this was like, we have, when you get over 500 viewers, you switch to this mode, and you have and then you're pumping out, and we can answer 200 questions an hour. And I will say that the amount of information you acquire from a vendor in that model is stunning. Like, you just know everything there is to know about that you'd ever want to know about the product. like in 1 hour, like you have all the information. It's an amazing thing. So we'll add that as we get larger. We've done that, in the past. Next question.
This question comes in from Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas. Says, did the NDI people happen? Would be interesting to see or hear more about that. What's new with version 5, and perhaps what else is coming?
We've been going back and forth trying to get the timing together. It doesn't help that I kick TriCaster often. It makes it slows down the conversation. So just in case you're wondering, so I have to find a new person to interview after I kick TriCaster again. But you can tell how committed I am to not saying things that I think. Anyway, next question.
Coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, what would you think of a second hour about incorporating neurodiverse, autism spectrum, etc., people onto the team?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I think Tony does a good job in this area. I think he really has brought in some issues. And Tony, maybe you can speak to this a little bit about how you've dealt with this. I don't think it fits into technology the way we do it here, really.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
I absolutely have no problem with dealing with those subjects on Conversation with Tony Mobley, but I also would say that is something that we also address on Saturdays in the education hour, specifically autism and other disabilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
This one from Greg McFarlane in Boston says, what other communities could be a target to do a monthly office hours panel to benefit all involved, production, panelists, and viewers?
Go ahead, Liberty.
I'm a fan of the marketing, the marketing community. I think marketing and the events, especially, that's just not going anywhere. And then especially if you want to lump in marketing, like the VR, the NFTs, all of those groups, I think that would be great, even if it was just once a month, so that we could really aggregate some good speakers in that space.
Yeah, I think that, an NFT conversation, just even a kickoff NFT conversation would be useful. The real turning point for me was I was talking to someone about NFTs, and I was like, I don't understand it. There's no value. And they were like, what's the inherent value of a trading card? Like of a baseball trading card that people are selling for thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a piece of paper that has no value other than we said it's authentic. And I was like, oh. I was like, okay, now I understand. Next question.
Coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, what would you think of a second hour on IT infrastructure as applied to production, scheduling, queuing systems, virtualization, and networking, etc.?
I think we probably pick one of those. I think we could. Those are probably 3 second hours. I do think we need to do more in that area. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas says, if a vendor approached office hours wanting to be featured, would we tell them their subject would need to be voted for by the group?
We've brought ones in that didn't require that. It's just mostly that we need to think that right now I need to think that, but as we spread out and put more people in it, whoever's managing the second hours will all talk about it and decide whether it's good. I mean, I think from a programming perspective, where you want to be informed by the viewers or the producers, but you don't want to be driven by it. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I think sometimes just for the entertainment of the panelists, grandma got run over by a reindeer. I mean, that was, and we learned. We think it's, this subject's going to be over here, but with this group, you pretty much throw them anything, a softball, a hardball, or whatever, they will hit it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
From Deborah Woodfork in Washington, D.C. says, are there any designated office hours scribes or note takers, especially for these brainstorming hours?
There is. Generally, a lot of this stuff is taken down most days. I don't know if it's happening today, but usually Sky, I think, is usually working on notes, pulling all the links from the chat. And I believe the chats are being pulled from Mukana. So there are definitely, and then we're recording it to YouTube. so it's still there. But there's definitely a couple people that are grabbing a lot of those things and putting them back into Discord. So that's happening. Not as well as it could, but that's also happening. And then Roscoe builds lists. So Roscoe, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, I do. I pick and choose and put together specific lists. But if you haven't, check in Mukana, just put /, and you'd be amazed what kind of things there are in there. And you'll find one that says /Mike A, and that was a homage to Mike Andrews, who was doing this for many years, a wonderful person who put together those links for us. And now there's actually a command in Mukana to put together all the links and questions, and you can do it yourself.
Next question.
Coming in from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia, says, we have a growing number of women in the community. Yay! How can we be more intentional with women being represented as vendors or guests?
We've definitely done that. So we've had, I definitely look for those opportunities. It's been mostly what comes up, as an opportunity as we look through it. But, we've definitely focused on having I have some women that I've talked to about doing it, and they're interested in coming on, but I want to finish the 2.0 conversion before I bring them on because their following is very large. So anyway, so I just have been waiting to turn that switch. But I do agree with you that I think that we should definitely do more of that. Absolutely, and it'd be great if we had more hosts that were women. Just saying. Anyway, we'll talk about that more. Go ahead, Tony. Oh, Tony's not
Yeah,
here. Oh, Tony,
I think it's great that this question was asked. One of the things that I think about, well, particularly in this particular subject, and just not just women, but minorities in general, is that there are a lot of, my perception is that there are a lot of women and minorities that are watching, and that they are just kind of still waiting to see what's going to come. But I also want to say that I think that we have a different demographic on Saturdays with education. We have a lot of women that are participating. And I think that if there was anything that, that I would push, is that maybe we make it more inviting to those women that are, what is it that's happening on Saturday that makes the women that are there? So what can we do to bring some of that population during the week? And
Liberty, you could probably answer that.
Great points, Tony. And I was thinking more when saying this is, correct me if I'm wrong, is there something where if a vendor is asking to come on, do we intentionally ask who else is on the team that could possibly come into the forefront? Like just kind of those, if there are any parameters from that perspective that could come in play. And then I forgot my other part, but
I always hesitate to try. For vendors, I always want them to bring on whoever is their product manager. like I want product manager and engineering, and however that turns out. I think the intentionality can really come from who we invite. As folks to come on. I think that there are some subject matters in the past when we talk about event planning, event marketing, those kinds of things where we see more women. I think education leans more towards that. I think that that's why we end up with almost half, because there's more. It is more of a. I think that the panel, I've said this before, but I think the panel represents where the industry was more than where it is. We are folks that are giving our advice, and we've been doing this for, in what has been traditionally a very white male dominated, thing. And so, which is breaking up, but I think that we're still that representation, of where it was. And I think that we're seeing more people coming in. So I think that, but what I never wanted to have, I never, ever, ever want people to feel like someone was here because they were something, like as opposed to just good at what they do, and so that's the thing that I'm always sensitive to, in that process, is not undermining them by having to feel like it's some kind of, setup, that pressure.
Not there. And in me asking that is just wondering about, and just even for everyone who's watching, just some women that are amazing in your space. And I'm
inviting them. Just so like I'm inviting them every week. Like, it's just, and I think that more women are more sensitive to being on a public forum than men are. So I think that I literally am inviting a woman to be on every week, and then some say yes and some say no. Mostly say no. And I think it's just because the nature of the internet is, the internet is not a pretty place. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I would also say that there's a good population of women that are participating in after hours, particularly if it's a lab being done on something that's really, really, sort of cross platform. It kind of brings in a whole different crowd, and I do think they don't turn the camera on, but they are there.
Yeah, I think that I think we make a mistake of thinking that the representation on the panel is the representation of the membership, and I think it's a very different thing. And people choose; it's wide open to come on, so people choose whether they want to do it or not. Next question.
Follow-up question from Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia. It says, when you think of office hours, you think video, audio, production, and media. What are the core office hour industries that we should be tapping into?
I mean, I think those are the ones that we want to talk about. I think that we can also talk about things that are even historical. Like I feel like I'd love to have some second hours where we talk about the history of, I don't know, Betamax, or beta tapes, or audio recording or other things like that. I think that those would be, fun if we had the right people. We are talking about bringing some folks on to talk about the origins of ambisonic, that kind of thing, which would be, I think, a really fascinating discussion to have. So I think that those are areas. I will say that, this version of office hours is media related, but we do cook on Saturdays. So anyway, so there's a lot of other things that could be covered, not necessarily in our hours, but in other hours. Go ahead, Tony.
What about movie reviews?
We could, I wouldn't put those in the second hour, mostly because of spoilers. There's a lot of people that are really sensitive to spoilers, and so I think that I'd always have that as an after hours or even a separate link, so that people go, okay, we've all watched this, we're all part of that, and we're going to go into it and tear it apart. That's more of what I would do there. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I struggle between, it would be really neat if every Thursday at 2:00 Pacific Coast time or whatever UTC, that, there was a group that did this. And that kind of takes place in after hours. But then I love the fact, too, that it's just kind of a hangout place. And there isn't anything necessarily scheduled. Things do bubble up. But so I don't know. There's kind of this schedule more or just leave it to be.
I definitely think that, again, my goal is to never get over more than 4 hours any given day on after hours being scheduled. And right now, just 1 hour up to 7 days a week. So people propose by today, for instance, for next week, hey, I want to do like we already have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 2:00. We're doing, the Isadora Labs. But if there was Monday and Tuesday or something else, we could put other things into it, which I would love to do. And then when that gets full and we really feel like that's working, we might open it up so people want to propose other hours. And again, those hours need to be proposed by the people who want to do them. Like if they want to do them at 8:00 at night Pacific Standard Time because they're in, Australia or whatever, that's fine with me. Like it's just, that's the, what they define what that looks like, as opposed to a hard hour of what it is. I do want to have most of the time in after hours be a little bit freewheeling, at least for now. And then I think that there's that organic water cooler experience is important. And I don't want to, if we program it all, will kill a lot of participation. And so, and the fact that you can just come up with a question almost any time of the day and get it answered is pretty powerful. When it gets to be unwieldy, when there's more than 100 people in after hours, then we'll give people more opportunities for, when we're constantly sitting over 100 is when I'll start going, there's going to be something like you can just schedule a breakout room 24/7 if you want to, where there's just people coming in and out, going to things, and hanging out with everybody when they go into it, but then going into some breakout room and doing it. So we'll organically do that as we get bigger. Next question.
James Babbitt of San Diego comes in with a suggestion. He says, Alex put a link in after hours to a 4K HDR demo, and he has a link there. Says, could we have a second hour focusing on home theater?
Go ahead, John.
Alex reached out to Scott Wilkinson, which was one of my favorite shows on Twitch, Home Theater Geeks, but I don't think he replied back, right?
Yeah, he didn't reply back. I'll ping him again.
How about Robert Heron maybe too, huh?
Yeah, I asked Robert Heron too, and he was really busy. This was like a year ago though. So I'll reach back out to Robert. We had a great conversation about some other stuff, and I thought it'd be fun to have him on. But let me see if we can get one of those guys to come back on. It's a great idea. Let's make sure to put it in the second hour. Next question.
From Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, could it help to keep the second hour suggestions thread in Discord to suggestions rather than letting chat creep in?
Yes, that'd be great. We get into a little bit of a conversation back and forth at times, and I think that threaded conversation makes it hard to read. So I think that it's mostly folks that haven't. I do it every once in a while. Like there are some mechanical things that are nice to talk back and forth. What it should be is related to what it takes to, I'm okay with some responding because sometimes I respond like, hey, we just need to have somebody who knows how to do this. But I think that what we don't want to do is get into a discussion about the product, about that second hour. So people saying that would be great. I would love to see something like this. I know someone in that area. I could talk about that. Those kind of responses I think are great for posts. actually talking about the subject matter that was posted there makes it much harder for me to read. Like, for me to read through and figure out what's going on. Next question.
There it went finally. Okay, from Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois, how about a deep dive into production positions with detailed descriptions for people just starting in the business?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I have this discussion with students quite often because they kind of dip into my class and they get this experience where they're like, oh, wow, this is fun, and I've always wanted to do it. There are so many positions that it's really, I need them to come back and say, oh, I really want to do, audio. Audio, what do you want? I mean, audio is a huge area. So I think it's really difficult to get to a real definitive description until you know exactly what that individual wants to do.
And one of the things I'd love to do is do more of, we started delving into this, and then I just wasn't able to follow up with enough people to do it. But we had a sound designer from, I don't know if I can say where, but came in from very near my house. Anyway, a sound designer came in and then we had Greg Kurta came in as a guest. That's how he started. He met, and another sound recordist, and all of these are people that Mickey or Greg brought in. So we had folks come in, and what I loved about that is that we learn about that position by talking to a person that does that, that position. What is it like, and all the things. I will say this over and over again is that practical knowledge is 10 times more valuable than theoretical knowledge. I don't care what people read in a book about anything or what they think will work. It's what's valuable is talking to people who from the ground. This is what it looks like when I'm doing it. Is incredible amount of value. Go ahead, Courtney.
A lot of people are confused by the jargon of the entertainment industry, like what is a key grip and what is a best boy, and so that it would help to have people on that describe their duties as each one of those uniquely named positions, and nobody knows what an assistant to the associate co-producer does.
Right. No, absolutely. Go ahead, Roscoe.
I was going to say one good example of this, and if you can ever catch it, Chapman Film School, which is in my county here near Disneyland, does a Women in Focus every April, and they bring in 5 ladies from the film industry. Sometimes they're editors, sometimes they're producers. They usually all have a similar or very specific job in the industry. Those have been absolutely wonderful. I've gotten so, because I need to know this stuff because a lot of my students are ladies and they want to get into this industry too. And so I need to those the kind of focused seminars I think are just absolutely great. Maybe a panel of people that work in an area would just be a great way to keep doing this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas says, what are the differences in dynamics when a second-hour vendor has more than one representative, maybe 2 or 3?
I think that oftentimes it helps because it lets them, I always invite them, if you want to bring in 2 or 3 people, I think that it works fine. Especially if you have someone like I thought Parsec worked well. You have the salesperson that wants to talk about the sales stuff. You have the technical, because they were going to have a salesperson just come on, and I was like, you're going to have someone technical. This is a really technical crew. Like don't talk to it. You don't want someone giving us a dog and pony. We need really detailed information. But that technical person doesn't want to talk about the business end of things. And so I think that having both of them there, I love the fact that we've had AWS on a couple times where they've got a couple of their product managers and engineers on, and they just dig into it for us. I think those are really valuable. So I think that I like having multiple people from it. I think it's a real, for most vendors, I think it's a real opportunity. And other ones like Sound Devices, when, like John's on with a couple other, other folk, John and Paul are great. And Matt, when Matt's come on as well. So those are
John
those
has
great.
left Sound Devices.
Yeah, kind of. so anyways, those things that don't usually happen overnight. But yeah, hope we can now. Once John's stuff slows down, we see if we can get him on more often, like as his schedule opens up. I don't know what he's doing next yet. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, says some second-hour guests join after hours after the show. Should this be a natural invitation?
I tell them about it I tell every vendor that there's an after hours, and I give them the link. so they know it's there. It's just them deciding whether they want to have a continued conversation or not. Next question.
From Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois, says, can there be a sign-up list or schedule for the first hour similar to the booking of the second hour?
Yeah, I'm working on that. We need to do that from a technical perspective, and I haven't figured out the mechanism yet. So that's the thing that I'm working on right now, is figuring out what that's going to actually have to look like. Doug, I will say, Dennis, by the way, having you have me and then me in Office Hours 2.0 creates a confusion on our end. There's like three of us, each person. There's three of us in the screen, which is difficult. Anyway, so for the second hour, what I'm working on or for the first hour, what I'm working on is an invite system that basically cascades. I'm going to send out invites to these 20 people for this given day. When they either don't respond or say no, then I have an order in which it just keeps on inviting people, for a week or 2 weeks out. This is the second hour, and we'd like to have you in. And some of them, what I'm trying to figure out are, on certain days, we want to invite some people first. Like on the audio days, there's probably 8 or 10 people that will get invited every audio day. that like, do you want to be in it? So the Mickeys and the Courtneys and the Gregs and the Jeffs and the, Brians and so on, like, they'll get invited. They might say no, but they'll get invited first, because we want to stack that audio day, and we want to stack, those. And then other ones will be general, like, how often do they participate and how often do they, do they leave early? Those kinds of things will all factor into who gets invited first versus second. The goal is always what we're trying to do is get 16, no less than 16 and no more than 20. And so we're going to try to get this invite system set up so that it's not random. We're not 12 one day and 24 another. Like, it's 16 to 20 is what we're trying to hit, for that. And so we'll invite 20 and kind of work through that system. And so that's what we're going to play with. But the mechanism seems simple in my head when I said we should do it, but the mechanism of figuring it out is taking some thought. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, says, in Discord second hours, could we find a way to mark off suggestions or topics as complete?
Yeah, Roscoe.
Well, not necessarily complete, but delved into, because with this group, nothing's ever complete. We're always learning and that kind of stuff. But I do think that I'd leave this up to Alex and maybe the topic teams to figure out if, a subject needs to be left aside for a little while.
Yeah, no, I agree. Next question. I can't hear you, Courtney.
Wrapping up our suggestions for the day, for the second hour, Douglas Carmichael says, what would you think of a second hour where we'd deep dive into the mix of well-known tracks?
Yeah, I mean, that always becomes a copyright issue. So that's the challenge is always when you dig into those become, it's easier for us to do that in office hours. After hours than office hours. If we're streaming to YouTube, it's really hard for us to go through a track. Now, one of the things I would like to do, and I have to reach out to the remotes. I've talked about it a little bit on one of these shows, but I have to make sure that they're okay with it. What I think would be exciting is to hand off 1 minute of a remote song and let people play with the mix and then have a discussion, or 1 minute of the remote song and let people put it into, for instance, surround. Like, hey, we're going to, like, one lab could be us doing some after hour stuff where we all kind of play with, what it takes to do some kind of surround mix, and then post a bunch of those somewhere, and then have us have a second hour talking about what each person did and what made it sense, and possibly even listen to it. In the new system, because we have control over it, we theoretically could put some of that into binaural if we wanted to. We could use hardware or a RMU to fold down a 5.1 mix or a 5.1.4 mix into binaural, and so that you could theoretically listen to it in Zoom, but you definitely hear it in the show. Like, you definitely hear it in YouTube. And we have to remember that after the top of the year, everyone will be on, everyone will be watching on YouTube. I guess they're not going to be watching in Zoom except for the panelists. And even with the panelists, the thing that I'm going to be working out over next week is potentially putting all the panelists on Unity. So the idea is the panelist audio coming to us will be in Unity, and their video will be coming over Zoom. And that gives us way more control over talkback and, everything else that we want that we want to do. So anyway, that's it. That's great. These are all very useful to me. so like it's usually like, okay, I want to turn up the volume a little bit. I think we need to do this at least once a month, or I'm sorry, at least once a quarter, possibly once a month, where we have kind of just a brainstorm about the second hours of things that we want to do. I think that as we start turning up the volume as we go into December and January, I just want it to be something that a large portion of people get really excited about every second hour. It's not, because I will admit, usually there's like 3 or 4 days that are really well planned out, and I've been working on them for a long time. And then there's usually like 2 days of every week that it's like Sunday night or Monday morning. Sometimes like, oh, what are we going to do for Tuesday? And so getting ahead of that, and part of that's getting a team together. But what I want to do is I want to get a whole bunch scheduled out. The reason I've asked for it today is that I'm going to try to, over next week, push starting the Monday, the 7th or whatever that is. Starting that day, I want it packed through for a month out, so that I can hand it off to a team that isn't trying to fulfill next week. They have a little bit of time to kind of come up to speed. So that's what I'm working on. Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, JJ just put in the Mukana that Greg has made some stems available, so there are some tracks available.
Great. Yeah, and so yeah, I just want to. I didn't want to start distributing stuff without asking. That's all. So but we'll talk about it, because I think we can take the whole Logic section and kind of play with it if people are interested. All right. Well, thank you again to all of the to our producers. Great set of questions. Great set of requests. It really keeps the whole thing moving forward. And thanks to the panelists for, again, every day coming here and sharing your knowledge with everybody else. It really makes a huge difference. And so hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow is, of course, education and the semi-long day, so it's not as bad. It's just so we have a big gap between. We have a 2-hour gap between the end of education and the beginning of the Belfast method. All right, see you then. Otherwise, we're gonna jump into after hours. Thanks.